It was a big shock because you're used to it constantly growing uninterruptedly, and then comes this big fall. What we realized was that some necessary structural reforms that needed to be done were not done. So we had to do them in of course, much more difficult circumstances, but we did it. And what also we saw that we need to do is, in order to become competitive again, you mentioned that we are in the first 50 or 60, but we used to be number 30 before the crisis. So we're still not there. We want to come back to those levels. And the only way to do that is to be more competitive, is to be more innovative. We have an excellent base in not only in the education system, but we have the same level of innovations in R&D and in the occupation of the technical and innovative skills like Denmark. So we invest a lot in research and development. The share of the researchers and developers, highly educated people, and the employees is among the highest. So we have a very good base, but of course we need the right support system. And this is exactly what the government is doing in the last few years. The most important step in this regard was adopting a smart specialization strategy, which was adopted in September, and which builds on the good things that we have, the good starting points, and how to improve the administrative, financial, conditions, business environment in order for the economy to grow faster based on knowledge and innovation. And not only that, they identified specific areas where we are the strongest, we have the strongest potential to find niche areas where we can focus our energies and be not just technological followers like we are now, but also to become technological leaders in these specific areas. So.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I will stay with you on this. Again, just to build on something that you said. There had to be an incentive for competitiveness. You had to sell it to the people of Slovenia. And that is, the incentive was the European Union, to join the club. With everything that has happened since 2008, if you ask the same question or the sentiment that does exist in Slovenia, you were able to achieve growth, you were able to be competitive, you have achieved certain structural reforms, still on the way there. Is the goal and the incentive still, despite everything that's happening in Europe and the European Union, is the incentive the European Union? Or have you gone through this learning curve that at this point the incentive should be a little bit external? It could be Southeast Asia, it could be Africa. Since you've built the discipline, this is something that we lack here. One is the incentive, and the second is the discipline to be able to achieve it. But you've achieved those two parts. The end justifies the mean. Here it is the means justifies the end. Does it have to be Europe? Is it still the incentive? Is it still the sentiment of the Slovenian people?
Yes and no. Of course, we realize that Europe is in a, now maybe in a different crisis than it was in 2008, but still. However, most of our business people still consider Europe as its primary market. It's a market they know well. It's basically a home market. It's not an external market for us. So, and it's, for us, it's easy to work in that environment, and we still think that there is untapped potential there. But we know that this is not enough. My Singaporean colleague said that, used a comparison that I wanted to use, but in our case it's more dramatic. He said that, if their partners sneeze, they get a cold. In our case, when the euro crisis hit and Germany sneezed, we export 70% of our exports in the EU goes to Germany. So when Germany sneezed in 2008, we got pneumonia. This is the the level of connectedness that we don't want to sustain, because we don't want to get pneumonia again. So the government is now pushing strongly for further internationalization of the exports, diversifying the export market. And actually, the most successful companies in Slovenia are those that are exporting all over the globe, where they find the world as their market, not just exporting to EU or to former Yugoslavia, etc. So people are aware that there is more to the world than Munich and Milano and Belgrade. Our business community was, I think a bit, because we were growing for 20 years nonstop, they got lulled by success, by relative easiness, because it's easy to do business in Europe. Although the competition there is very high, but still we knew how to do it. It's much more difficult to step out of your comfort zone and go to China or to India or to Egypt, for example. So they are now, forced to do that. Not just it's not only a rational decision, but also, they have no choice. They have to do that.
Would you adopt the British model, the UK model of maintaining your own currency, or would you enter the Eurozone as well?
We are in the Eurozone.
We are the Eurozone.
Yeah, and we are not thinking of, you have countries in Europe that would always say, oh, it's Brussels' fault, or we should get out of EU, or we should, get back to our own currency. This has never happened in Slovenia. We never had these, second thoughts. Even during the height of the crisis of the Eurozone, this is not something that was on our mind. We feel strongly as part of the EU, of the Eurozone, of the Euro market, and these kind of thoughts are not prevalent, I would say. They exist, but they are not prevalent. We feel very much part of Europe.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Deborah, thank you for being with us. I'm really happy that we're sitting with Their Excellencies talking about the different experiences. And you travel around the world, you are the president of GFCC, you see all of these different countries and how they perform. You have firsthand access to the documentation, the research, and the decoder, and the Global Competitiveness Index. Now, what you have here is basically top 5, actually top 3. Then you have the top 20. Then we have the top 60 on the Global Competitiveness Index. And you have the top 100, 116. Each of us are in a completely different stage of our competitiveness maturity, in a sense. How do you deal when you're doing the principles, or you're working with the principles of competitiveness at that different stages of maturity of competitiveness in these specific countries? And keeping in mind that despite the fact that Slovenia is now one of the top 60, they were 30, and as Egypt was one of the top 100 now, we were at one point in the 60s. So how does that play out in your mind, in your experience?
Well, I think one of the ways it plays out is in this discussion, in my listening, I've heard in each of these different countries some threads that are running through that are very consistent, that have enabled them, I think, to have their leadership and growth. And one of the most important, of course, is the investment in people and the recognition that at the end of the day, the jobs that are generated, the productivity, all of that depends on having smart, talented, educated people who can function in an environment that gives them a lot of flexibility. And I actually know Slovenia quite well because years ago, when it was part of Yugoslavia, I was involved in scientific exchange programs between the United States and former Eastern Europe. And Ljubljana and that whole environment in Slovenia has a tremendous, rich history of innovation. And of course, we see that in Singapore as well, and similarly in Denmark. So I think this theme of investing in people and recognizing that competitiveness and how you move forward is this constant churn. Nothing is static. And I think one of the advantages that we have in the United States, and not everybody, adheres to this even in our own country, but when you look at history, is that we sort of instinctively believe and accept in creative destruction. And one of the debates we have right now is between those who want to try to preserve the 20th century production model that's gone, and those who are saying we have to continue to innovate and go to the next stage. And so when I look at Egypt, and we're here in Egypt, so this is very important, I think one of the biggest issues here is how, and we heard this morning from Chairman Dewish, which was a fabulous presentation. Look what's happening in that Suez zone with dismantling the red tape, the bureaucracy. I mean, this is a tremendous pilot for Egypt. If that can be successful and permeate into this economy, I think you have a really exciting roadmap going forward. The other thing I would say, in looking at the comparisons in countries, is that in many areas size does matter. And in the cases of Denmark, Singapore, and Slovenia, I mean, the populations themselves are not as big as Cairo.
Actually, it's not as big as Zamalek, as a matter of fact. If you really
so in a way, that's a huge advantage, because you can be more coherent and have a strategy. And I think also, even though it's beginning to change in Europe, and certainly with Denmark, with the influx of different people, you have a fairly homogeneous cultural environment in which to operate. And culture matters in all these things, too.
So what I'm understanding is, again, it's like what Bruno was saying this morning. It's education. It's really education. In each and every one of these countries, you have really high education. Now, of course, I'm going to take final comments from you, but I want to take them on education and innovation, because we suffer from that majorly. Is it, in your opinion, economic opinion, Your Excellency, please, the difference between free state education and actual private education? Here in Egypt, again, we've got something like 10 million students. We graduate about 2.6 million people from higher education. We've got 10 million secondary and primary school education. We've got tens and tens of universities. We've got hundreds and thousands of primary schools and secondary schools, none of which are producing the quality of the people that Bruno and all of us have been talking about. Now, I have always argued, again, because I really tend to lean towards the Milton Friedman notion of free market economics, less government intervention, so on and so forth, and the notion that no matter how free education is, it's really never for free. So, in your economic opinion, and out of the experience of Denmark, how do you balance between state education, which is important for primary and secondary students, and then higher education? How do you balance that to be able to produce that factory line of innovative and smart Danish people?
Thank you so much. That's a very, very good question, but I think I would like to start with saying that one of the things that has impressed me in this country is the numerous, not least young Egyptians who are well educated, super innovative, have lots of ideas and lots of willingness to actually work for Egypt and to get the ideas flowing, etc., etc. When I say that, I don't say that education is not the issue, because of course education is a key issue. But I think the concern that I can have by focusing on one issue in particular is that at the end of the day, just because you get well-educated people out doesn't mean that they can prosper. So for me, I think the key thing, and I think one of the things that has been key in my own country, is an effort to try to have a holistic approach all the time. That just because you fix one part of the chain doesn't necessarily mean you would prosper. And I also think that it is important that in this country, of course, right now, there is lots of focus on education, and there's lots of discussion about education. That can sometimes be of concern to me, because there's so many other aspects of this society where Egyptians, I would believe, what we have seen here, there's many choices. Prem was talking about, you choose whether you want the welfare state or you don't. There are many issues where the Egyptian society would have to make choices, and only Egypt can make those choices. And a part of that is, what kind of an education system would you like to have? What kind of citizens would you like to have? What is it you want to have characterized of when you talk about the people that you have? So there's many choices that have to be made, and you can only make them when you actually look at the holistic picture. So it's not about whether it's private or public or whether it's free or not. It's a matter of, I believe, having an eye on the ball in the long perspective, but a holistic picture of it rather than just looking at one thing.